Hello, this is Matt. That was a very simple rocket stove design I assembled in the backyard. At the end of this video, I'll show you how to put one together very easily and quickly with just a few fire bricks if anybody's interested. But the reason for this video is I can't tell you over the years how many videos I've gone to just for fun, because I understand how rocket stoves work, where it says rocket stoves explained, and really nothing is explained in the video. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to explain the basics of how these finally explain the basics. If you've made a video explaining the basics and you've done this already, I do apologize because I haven't gotten to everybody's video. But number one, a rocket stove like this is, let's just start with the metal design. These are more for cooking, not as much for heating. The heating rocket stoves are typically made of fire brick. They are J design or batch box design. We'll look at that with how to construct my simple rocket stove at the end of this video. But for the basic principles as to how they work, let's just start with the first iteration of rocket stove that came roughly 12 years. I'm sure it's been around longer than that, but it really hit the YouTube videos big time 10 to 12 years ago. These metal hybrid J designs. Okay, but the same concepts will apply to all rocket stoves, even to a degree to a batch box rocket stove. Principle number one is called small spaces / cramped quarters. So you remember, where the sticks burn, very tight space within the riser, usually extremely small. If it was 12 inches, the box was 15 inches by 15 inches, it would allow too much air in. Air actually ends up cooling a lot of systems, like an air conditioner. If everything is focused, similar to a forge, then the walls are very close together. 4-inch rocket stove, 6, 8-inch at the most. Usually they're much smaller. The heat is focused where the sticks burn. The walls very tight. This is similar to the way someone would focus air for a very narrow part of a forge. And that narrowness or tight space or cramped quarters is kept small throughout the riser. So the riser is not just a chimney. Many inches of the riser acts as an additional burn chamber. Because it's so tight, the temperatures go up above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 or 1,400 or even more. Once you get above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or around there, all the smoke starts burning off. Smoke is actually fuel if you get temperatures high enough. So this design here, if you used a gigantic square and big open spaces, too much air would be getting in, and that acts as an air conditioner. Any smoke that comes out would not be burned off if it's not a tight, cramped space or where air is focused where the sticks burn. And if it's too wide, it doesn't work. The second element of a rocket stove that is necessary for it to work is the need for the design to create turbulence of some kind. A batch box rocket stove we'll look at later creates turbulence through the thin little port, but let's just stick to the old classic design, the metal ones here. The 45-degree angle here is where you would put the sticks in. Of course, the riser, the chimney, and then the one along the ground is just for air. It doesn't seem like it would matter much, but right where the burning of the sticks takes place, which would be right at the bottom of the elbow, right at the left side of the L, if you remove the 45 degree. The air is coming in from two different directions and it's going up in a different direction. It creates a degree of turbulence. There's a mixing of some kind, even if it only mixes for a quarter second or less. It's enough where all the smoke and things mix with that high, extremely high heat because of the cramped quarters. It's enough, and the turbulence to a degree continues up the riser until everything smooths out. It's enough to burn off the smoke and to have a no-smoke rocket stove. If this rocket stove, if you remove the 45-degree weld and it just was an L, you just see the letter L there, it probably would still work because it's so, the cramped quarters, it's so tight that the heat is so concentrated, it probably still would burn off all the smoke. But let's say that L was the letter C, or almost an entire letter C. The bend was completely smooth. There'd be no turbulence. The air would be rushing through so quickly that there wouldn't be any mixing. It wouldn't be slowing the elbow and it ramming into the bottom of the L. It creates it just slows things up just a bit for everything to mix. And if you have air moving through a rocket stove too quickly, then without the turbulence, then you get smoke, and the situation isn't ideal. The next element is fast-moving air and lots of air, but concentrated, again, inside cramped quarters, concentrated on the small section where things burn. And then again, the turbulence has to be created or everything moves too fast. So maybe the fast moving air and lots of air is more important, but I wanted to talk about the turbulence first. Air coming in, say, from the right to the left along the bottom of the L creates momentum. And actually, when it hits the change of direction, because of the speed, there's a little bit more mixing, a little bit more turbulence. Also, people don't realize that the cramped quarters or small channels actually create much more speed of air than large channels do. Unless it's so small, of course, everything's all choked off. I mean, like a U.S. Chimney design for a regular fireplace in the United States is terrible. Most chimneys are far too wide. The box, the masonry, the bricks going up is too big. It's just a load of air that just sits there. Where a wood stove where the air is just going up what you would call a chimney insert, just a 6-inch tube for a wood stove, and that 6-inch tube extends down through the chimney for the stove, things move like 5 times faster. In a Russian stove, the lifting channels where the smoke goes up are much smaller, or maybe sometimes half of the descending channels, because the Russians weave their smoke up and down and around and about before they allow it to exit the house through the chimney. The smaller channel actually creates far more speed than a larger channel does, unless it's just too small. The next principle is a focused burn. If there are long sticks going in on the 45 degree, only 4 or 5 inches of the sticks down towards the bottom, right at that elbow, right at the left side of that L. It's only burning in a very small section, and the air is rushing right into that section with the turbulence. It's very much like a forge, not as concentrated, but the principles are the same. There are big differences with the batch box rocket stove made with fire bricks that we'll look at a little bit later, that are going to be far different from the older J design welded steel rocket stoves in this one area. And finally, a general principle that just has something to do with everything we talked about previously is keeping the temperatures up as much as possible. So if you have a very small tube, the walls are very close to each other, the temperature is radiating in a very small area, the flames are burning in a very concentrated area with the air forced through the flames, cramped quarters, keeps temperatures up. These metal welded rocket stoves, that's how they all are able to generate the rockety effect with no smoke. One of the ways the rockety effect is achieved is a chimney or a riser that gets extremely hot pulls much more forcibly and drafts and draws more forcibly. So these close quarters, the riser, for one of the 700 degrees probably on just the metal, it's pulling like incredible amounts. So keeping everything hot. When you see somebody making a rocket stove video and they're insulating the riser or insulating the chimney, say as it's going up into a barrel in one of these, rocket mass heaters, many people will insulate the riser. They'll surround it in clay or cob or perlite or vermiculite or pack mineral wool insulation. Sometimes it's necessary. Most of the times, I don't think these people know what they're doing. They just watched a video and they think they have to insulate the riser, and most risers don't have to be insulated. But again, there's a little bit difference in the application here, say an outdoor cooking rocket stove versus a rocket stove that's going to heat a thermal mass or a cob bench. But just in general, most people that insulate the riser, there's no need in most cases. But the principle is sound. It might be needed in some cases. The principle is what we're talking about here, and this is the final principle. The riser that can be, or the tube going up that can be kept as hot as humanly possible for as long as possible, acts just as an extended burn chamber. So there may be smoke 3, 4, 5 inches going up the riser, but that smoke, the temperatures are so intense in cramped quarters with a chimney that's insulated, small spaces, focused heating, that by the time the smoke gets 5, 6, 7 inches up the riser, it's all burnt up as fuel. And that's why any successful rocket stove has no smoke. These are the basic principles. I've never heard this explained. It was frustrating me. So I'm going to talk more about the basic mistakes people make with rocket stoves, difference between batch box and these. Some more things I'll show you, some more of the video of the real simple rocket stove I put together in the backyard if anybody wants to hang out. But these are the principles. Switching over now to talk about this type of rocket stove, which they call a batch box rocket stove. I don't know. I didn't name it. I don't know where that came from. It's a bigger box in the front. The box in the front should have a door. Just something, you can slap this together in like 20 minutes in the backyard. You can put a bunch of sticks in that box, and then there's a port or a thin slit where the gases and flames go up into the riser. I'll show you the parts where it's opened up and show you how this works. This is basically what you'd want to use to send up into a barrel. You put the barrel upside down over the riser, and then many people will then extend their chimney horizontally off to the left or right for 4 or 5 feet through a cob bench or a brick bench, wind it around a bit until it finds the chimney on the way out. A rocket stove like this that has a barrel over the top of the riser, you allow 1.5 inches to 2 inches only between the top of this riser chimney and the barrel. Adding more space, like 3 or 4 inches, is not good. It slows everything down. Of course, if it's less than 1.5 inches, then you choke it off and nothing works. It's 2 inches to 1.5 inches. That small space between the barrel and the top of the riser, the gases come down on all 4 sides, and then you can wind them around through a bench, a cob bench, a brick bench, whatever you want to do. But the barrel actually creates more draft and draw with a rocket stove. I think it actually adds to the draft. At least that's been my experience. Putting a barrel 1.5 inches to 2 inches over the top doesn't slow anything down. At least we could agree on that. For reference, when we talk about this stuff in this, quote, batch box design, there's that, I don't know what you call it, a slit in the back. They call it a port. So the flame is directed through that narrow door in the back. The purpose of that narrow door is to create turbulence. Without it, everything goes up the riser too quickly. All the smoke is not burned up. It creates a mixing, squeezing it through this port or this door. On the metal rocket stove, we looked how it was focusing the heat in a small space, and that's also kind of what the port does. All the heat is coming together as it goes through that thinner door. The heat right there is extremely concentrated. The smoke that is going through there, but it's then mixing with the flame, getting above that 1200 degrees, and the smoke then is being burnt off. That is the main purpose of the port, in my opinion. So if you want to make a rocket stove, it's easy. It's all there is to it. You just get some fire bricks, your standard full-size fire brick, which is 9 inches by 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches, usually sold wherever cinder blocks and other bricks are sold. Building supply stores, Home Depot and Lowe's, as far as I know, do not have fire bricks in the United States, but they're not hard to find. You want the full-size fire bricks, not the sliver or the skinny ones. The base is just 6 fire bricks laid flat, and then you can't really see it, but under the chimney portion there's 2 fire bricks. So it's 8 bricks. That's all the base is. Then you just, on the side, you see there's just 4 fire bricks on each side. And then the chimney there, what starts to make the riser, is 6 fire bricks. 4 that go together, and then 2, I just pulled them apart to make what they call the port, where the flame and the air kind of moves through quickly, creates the turbulence, etc. Now, there's people online that have here's the exact size of the port you need. You don't need all that. People overthink this. They really do. I mean, Matt, where's your secondary air? Forget this. F the secondary air. People overthink these things and insulate the riser. Come on, man. It's simple. I don't know what the port. I just pulled the blocks apart. You probably want to err on making the port a little bit thinner than you would think. But for this, I don't know, like 2.5 inches, the port. If it's too wide, it'll allow everything to move through too quickly. Although to a degree, the port creates speed, but I don't want to get into that. You need turbulence. You need it to going through a thinner channel. So maybe 2.5 inches. I'm not sure. But then you would just take fire bricks and just kind of lay them across the top. Because of the distances, you might have to move your walls in a bit. Then as you stack your riser, create your chimney. I mean, these fire bricks to start the riser, to start the chimney, are all up on their end, right? They're standing up. From here on up, I'll try to show you another image or two of what I did. I don't know. Some lay down, some stand up. They kind of go together that way. They're not all standing up all the way up. At this point, you start to lay most of them down, and a few stand up, and it all goes together. And you need a good amount of height. You get as much height as you can, because that port, especially once everything is mortared up and you fill the joints, create that heat. A bigger riser will draw everything through more quickly, and it will act as again, something it's like a long burn chamber. The riser itself is a long burn chamber that burns up all the smoke. They have formulas on Matt. The formula says 2 by 4.5. But forget the formulas. As long as you have a pretty darn long chimney, it's good enough. The chimney, I don't know. Maybe you want at least probably 3 feet. I made mine a little bit longer here than I probably had to. This is a better picture how you would stagger the fire bricks if you want to slap something together pretty quickly. In the back end, I'll talk a little bit about mortar, or if you want to do something more permanent, I guess I'll talk about that for a few minutes in the back. This is another video. I took the sound out, and I'm talking over it now. It's comical. On YouTube, a lot of people will insulate the riser and the riser's fire brick. This is comical to me, even inside a barrel. They'll wrap insulation, fireproof insulation, around a fire brick riser, and then with a barrel on top. I mean, what? What's the purpose of the insulation? The fire brick by itself. You saw there's no smoke on this thing. The thick fire brick by itself, it's insulation, and then some. It's so, and then if you put a barrel over this, making some sort of rocket mass heater, the barrel itself and all the hot air around the riser, it's 500 degrees. What are they insulating? It's comical. It really is. In some applications, if you have a steel riser, you may need to You may need to insulate that, but insulating fire brick, you see this all over YouTube. It's comical. No need. If anybody wants to make one of these more permanently, or even make some sort of heater for their home with a barrel over top or a cob bench, just some tips on the mortar and things you might need to know putting this together. Again, the standard fire brick is 9 inches by 4.5 by 2.5. If you can afford it, it's maybe $40 to $45 a bag. The refractory cement for the fire bricks is best. I'll give you another option in a moment that's it's not actually that much cheaper. But you put on, when you buy the refractory mortar that's good to 2,000 degrees or whatever it may be, you want to soak the fire brick, dunk it under water for a good 5 to 10 seconds. Pull it out sopping wet, and then put in your refractory mix, very, very thin mix. The joints on refractory mortar to fire brick, very, very thin, almost where there isn't even a joint. Some of the Russians, to make it stick even more, they'll put it on thin, they'll wipe it off, and then they'll put it right back on extremely thin. It creates I don't know, fills the gaps. It creates more of a suction and a better bond. They put it on, they wipe it off. They wipe it off. It's again, the brick has been dunked and soaked, and then they put it back on extremely thin, rubber hammering it together where there's almost no joint that you can see. Not a 3/8 joint like regular bricks. Everything extremely tight with refractory mortar and fire brick. This also helps create more heat. If you just these rocket stoves work if you just stack the brick, but there's so many like little gaps and air's getting in, cooling the whole system. So if it works just stacked with no mortar, it'll work much better once everything is mortared together. Another option, you don't want to use type S cement or type N cement or cement. It'll hold up for a few years probably and crack. You'd want to use, people use 3 parts sand to 1 part fire clay. And fire clay itself now is like $30 a bag or something because everybody wants a fire clay sink. I want a fire clay sink. I want a fire clay sink. So the price of fire clay is up through the roof. 3 parts sand, masonry sand, not play sand, to 1 part clay. Some people will just use that. Again, thin, but if I was doing it, I would add a half part lime, the hydrated lime, and I probably would add a half part or a little less than a half part of type S or type N cement. So I would add a half part or a little bit less lime and cement to my 3 part sand, 1 part clay. And I would also keep my joints very thin. Just the cement and lime will hold everything together. The clay and sand by itself, that's I don't know. You can't work as quickly because things don't set up for a long time, and that never really sets up. There's no real glue in 3 parts sand, 1 part clay. Anyway, it doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of these fire bricks you can make again, like you saw, you can make a rocket stove just stacking them. You don't even need mortar, but you should, if you're going to do something permanent, of course, use mortar and take your time. Your base of this batch box part, the base of where the wood is before the port, remember, is just 6 fire bricks. So your roof or cover over top of the box is here just 4 fire bricks. But don't cut this too close because of the way the base is. These fire bricks are the quote roof. It's only on by like a 1/16 of an inch, ready to fall off. So you just move your sides in just a little bit. If you use a nice mortar, you don't need them to be on, a 1/4 inch on each side's fine if you have mortar to kind of glue or cement everything in place. But here, you tap the side, the whole roof will fall in because it's just on like barely. It barely fits across. You'll see that when you go to make it. You could, if you have time, if you have any wet saw, by the way, any cheap wet saw from Home Depot or Harbor Freight, some of these wet saws are like $35, are dirt cheap, will easily cut fire brick. Fire brick is very soft. So you could actually make some, if you have a little wet saw or access to one, you could make some cuts and, bridge the gap that way. Use 2 fire bricks that are cut. So you'd have a total of 8 that are cut to make the roof of the batch box instead of like balancing it barely on the sides. If it does, I don't know, this design though does not need any cuts at all. That's the beauty of this design. Of course, if you're going to make a door or a glass door, or you'd probably want to have an angle grinder or a way to cut fire brick. I like wet saws for fire brick much more than an angle grinder. The lines are much easier and straighter. It's not all over the place. You can also get masonry blades for 7-inch masonry blades for circular saws. But when you cut this fire brick, it's silica. It's nasty. Always wear a mask and eye protection. It's not like cutting regular brick. Silica, it's nasty. You don't want to breathe it. Final reminders in this video: if you're going to make one of these like a permanent structure, and at the very end I'll talk about using the barrel for heat. Again, use the refractory mortar or the high heat mortar if you can. Do what the Russians do if you have the patience. Soak the brick. Brick has to be sopping wet. Put it in a bucket. 10 seconds, 5 seconds at least. Don't just use, I'm going to use a little sprayer. No. I'm going to just spray the top lightly. No, that's not good enough. It's like a sponge, these fire bricks. You have to dunk it underwater. at least 5 seconds, if not 10. Put your refractory mortar on, wipe it with a trowel or a putty knife, scrape it completely off, and then put it right back on, and then pound your joint down to a 1/4 inch or even less. Then it will be extremely sticky. You can continue to work. You could if your brick's soaking wet, you can get away with just troweling on the refractory mortar without having to scrape it off. And I don't like refractory mortar. It doesn't set up real strong. It takes a long time to set up. I don't know. I would take that. There's not many bricks you have to work with here. I would put it on, scrape it off, put it right back on, take the joint down to a 1/4 inch or less with a rubber hammer. Keep checking your level, etc. So the last thing to talk about is if you're going to use a rocket stove for heat, you don't necessarily need a barrel, but that's what 95%, 99% of everybody does. You get your barrel at your, at the junkyard or whatever. The bottom is closed up, the top is open. You flip the barrel and you put it over top of the chimney or the top of the riser of the rocket stove. The gap again should be 1.5 inches to 2 inches. You don't want it any closer than 1.5 inches. It'll choke off. You don't want any more. Oh, I'm just going to give 4 inches. No, it has to be close, 1.5 to 2 inches. Some people actually will fire the whole system up and move the barrel up and down to measure exactly where it should be based on the sound or the rockety sound going through. The last thing about using the barrel for heat, the barrel is wider than the entire rocket stove, so you need cinder blocks or bricks or dirt or gravel. You need something to place the barrel on the sides of the rocket stove, making sure your top is that 1.5 to 2 inches from the top of whatever length of riser you chose. Of course, you can't make your riser 8 feet. The barrel will be hanging up in the air. You have to take all that into consideration, how much you want to build up the sides. Then it has to be all sealed so smoke doesn't get out in your house. At the bottom of the barrel, maybe 3 or 4 inches up, you cut a 6-inch circle for the 6-inch stovepipe that will exit the gases that came down the side of the barrel, and then you're going to take via that stovepipe hole, take your gases up and out your chimney, and then eventually out of your house.